Greetings, I am Peter White and I'm speaking to you from my office in Coker Hall of the Department of Biology at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. In the next 30 minutes, I'm going to share with you memories of the 28 years that I was director of the North Carolina Botanical Garden. I first gave a version of this talk in December 2014, the last month that I served as director. And this version is in honor of the garden's 50th anniversary in 2016. In a way, it's my birthday card to all of you, so happy birthday. For these memories, I will be an observer of the garden and staff, volunteers and supporters, all of you who are responsible for what we accomplished during my time as director. I'll talk about changes and shiny new things. But let's not forget, it's the everyday work of an incredibly dedicated staff and volunteers that make the garden what it is, that allow us to accomplish our mission. This slide also reminds me to say there are many faces in the pictures to come. I don't have time to identify everyone, but you know who you are. Thank you for all that you've done for the success of the North Carolina Botanical Garden. 28 years. In 1986, I was 38 years old. We had rotary phones and one IBM XT. The staff fit around one meeting table. A public street separated our display gardens and parking. And another way of measuring all that time is that I served under 6 chancellors and 1 interim chancellor, 8 provosts and 5 interim provosts, and 6 biology chairs. Lots of things happened, and I feel very lucky to have been part of all those years and all those changes. In my talk on the conservation garden, I argue that conservation is like a baton. Well, a botanical garden is like a baton too. I replaced our founding director, Dr. Richie Bell, and this conservation garden is now safe under Damon Waite, the garden's first ever full-time director. I will use this outline for a sampling of memories. Camels going through the eyes of needles, amazing things, important steps, improving all the time, going first class, additions and being good stewards, fun. This is not a chronological account. It's not a true history of those 28 years at the garden. And looking back over that time, yes, there were struggles over budget and changing university administrative requirements. But looking back from this distance, I only see the good things. And that's what this story will be about. Camels going through the eyes of needles, stepping into the darkness, taking risks, impossibilities. That's what it felt like to be director some of the time. My first example is the Paul Green Cabin, the first fundraising project we did after I arrived at the garden. In the upper right, you see Sally Vilas with her husband Harry Gooder. Sally had a co-conspirator, Rhoda Wynn, and they came down to the Totten Center and they asked whether the garden would be willing to receive the donation of this cabin. Now the cabin was falling down. It was on a private piece of land about 2 miles away. The owner wanted to get rid of the cabin and put up a house. Well, Paul Green was a playwright who specialized in dramas about the history of North Carolina and its people. But he also tried to get the botanical information correct in his plays, how European settlers, African Americans, and Native Americans all related to the plant world. Well, there was resistance in the university. The planning office wanted to know why we wanted this fallen down cabin that was probably a hazard to people's safety. And then there was the price tag, $40,000. We've gone on to raise much more than that, but at the time, $40,000 seemed like a huge amount. Well, Sally and Rhoda worked tirelessly. They could not be denied. They could not be resisted. They convinced the university, they raised the money, and the cabin came down 15501 on a flatbed truck. It was my first glimmer that, yes, we could plan, we could think big, we could make positive changes, we could raise money. And years later, Paul Green's interest in plants was the subject of this book, Paul Green's Plant Book. It was written by Paul Green's daughter, Betsy Green Moyer, and our own assistant director, Ken Moore. Fast forward to 2014, and here we are celebrating the naming of the Education Center as the James and Delight Allen Education Center. This is in recognition of a very generous estate gift to come to the garden in the future from the Allens. But Jim Allen had a further idea. If they were going to be this generous, why didn't the university do something big in return for the North Carolina Botanical Garden? And his idea was the university should forgive the outstanding $2 million loan on the construction of this building. Now, it was a $12 million project, and we had borrowed that last $2 million from the university as construction got going. Well, Charlotte drafted a proposal and ran it by me, and we sent it up to the chancellor's office and asked for a meeting. To be honest, I wouldn't have given its chance of success a very high rating. But imagine my surprise when I walked into the chancellor's office, and before I sat down or even began to argue the case, Holden Thorpe said, "I say let's declare victory and move on." And like that, the big weight of an outstanding $2 million loan was gone. Looking into the future, that also made me feel so much better about turning the garden over to the next director without this $2 million loan hanging over the head of that new director. Another example of a camel going through the eye of the needle is represented by this picture. The woman in the wonderful red dress is Eleanor Pegg, and she's there with her granddaughter, and Bill Friday is on hand to help us celebrate Eleanor's gift for the Education Center at the Botanical Garden Foundation holiday party. This gift consisted of a tract of land along the Haw River, and no sooner had word gotten out about this that conservationists led by the Haw River Assembly asked for a meeting at the Totten Center. It was easy and a pleasure to walk into that room and be able to tell that group that no, that land would not be developed. Well, easily said, but that set off over 2.5 years of work by Charlotte Jones Rowe and others. Charlotte drafted a proposal. She worked with the Triangle Land Conservancy to submit that to the Clean Water Management Trust Fund of the state of North Carolina to get the funds to purchase the land in order to protect the water quality of the Haw River, but also the biodiversity of that tract. So the money came through the Triangle Land Conservancy to the garden, $1 million. The land went to the state for preservation. A successful project. And here we are celebrating. Representatives from the state park system, from the Triangle Land Conservancy, from the Botanical Garden Foundation, and from the garden staff are celebrating this beautiful tract of land that will in the future become part of Haw River State Park. It's right where the 15501 bridge crosses coming from Chapel Hill towards Pittsboro. If you look closely, you can see Charlotte in a yellow kayak in the upper right. My next example of camels going through the eyes of needles was the closing of Laurel Hill Road. In the early 1990s, we went to the town council of Chapel Hill to propose the closing of the road. But there were two problems. First, the neighborhood association had concerns about this closing, and neighbors spoke about those concerns. Secondly, the 15501 corridor was about to be expanded, widened from 2 to 4 lanes, and ultimately the town council voted to table our motion till after the widening. Well, when we got ready to build the Education Center, I was determined to bundle the closing of Laurel Hill Road with construction. And I wanted to be assured of success this time. So we met with the neighborhood association, and Jim Ward was very helpful in being the coordinator of a series of meetings with the neighborhood committee. We met for some 2 years, and we talked about neighborhood concerns and possible solutions. And in the end, we had an agreement. The intersection shown in the upper right picture was improved. The neighborhood wanted a 24/7 bike and pedestrian path. We agreed to promote and argue for sidewalks along 15501 and also signalized crosswalks at the major intersections. So when we went back to town council, the neighborhood spoke in support of the closing. And these pictures show the day that the signs went up, road closed, and the first visitors were able to walk from our visitor parking lot to the display gardens at the Totten Center without watching for traffic. The asphalt eventually came up and was replaced with beautiful gardens created by the horticultural staff under the leadership of Chris Laloya, and the sidewalks along what used to be Laurel Hill Road had leaf impressions done by the garden staff. Here's what that corridor became. Many other camels went through eyes of needles too. The acquisition of the Ivy property. Johnny Randall worked really hard with local governments, and a key gift from the Jocelyn family allowed us to acquire a very expensive piece of property that became part of the Stillhouse Bottom Nature Preserve. Defeating Laurel Hill Parkway with the help of the New Hope Audubon Society and our own Green Dragon volunteers, a road that was once proposed to cross Mason Farm Biological Reserve. Hiring a fundraiser and having it pay for itself within a year or a year and a half. Getting the UNC Herbarium as a new department of the Botanical Garden, along with the position of director that Alan Weekly now holds. Getting Battle Park with a budget for the operation and restoration of that wonderful tract of land. So you really have to think of this as a lot of heroic work. Heroic work on the part of the staff, support from the board, working with our community. Category 2, Amazing Things. Here we are on University Day, October 12th, 2009, celebrating the completion of the Education Center and dedicating the building. And there's Holden Thorpe, Chancellor of the University, cutting the wildflower garland the staff has made to officially open the building. And to the left of Holden is our Governor, Beverly Perdue, herself a friend and a fan of the North Carolina Botanical Garden. And after the Education Center opened, the garden began to fill with life of all sorts, life represented by the display gardens created by the horticultural staff around the new building. And it was also amazing that the garden began to fill with people, with new lectures and classes and educational exhibits and art exhibits and outdoor activities, with meetings and symposia and workshop of all sorts and sizes. The children's programming expanded, thanks to the leadership of Alicia Taylor. And the curriculum for the environment and ecology began holding its UNC graduation ceremony at our wonderful Platinum Education Center. The garden also filled with art. Here's the Fraser Magnolia wall hanging that was presented to the garden as we opened the new building, a gift of the Massengale family, and Tom Massengale is standing there and turning and talking to Tom Keenan. Muriel Easterling, a long-term volunteer, worked with the Quilters Guild to create this wonderful set of quilts that celebrate the garden's Wildflower of the Year project. We had designed the Education Center to achieve a LEED Platinum status, but it's a very difficult application, some 300 pages long, full of outside certifications. You submit that after you open the building, and then you wait, and an anonymous panel of the American Green Building Council goes through your materials and decides how many points should be awarded. In December 2010, Diane Gillis, the university architect assigned to our project, and Cindy Shea, the university's sustainability coordinator, called me up and invited me to meet them at the Glass Half Full restaurant in Carborough because they had heard that the results would be posted on the web. So I met them there. We got on an iPhone. We went to the web. And as you can see, discovered this project has achieved enough points for platinum rating. An amazing result of years and years of staff imagination and dreaming and fundraising and effort. We did get those sidewalks along the bypass, the Fordham Boulevard roadway. We did get signalized crosswalks and bus service. And the bus service was worth one of our LEED Platinum points. So we're on to important steps. During the 1990s, the staff, working with landscape architect Tom Hunter, developed a plan we called the Bridge to the Future Plan. That was a series of smaller, shorter-term, less expensive projects that we could do to demonstrate success and to improve the garden. In the middle picture, you see the cattail gate. It was designed and constructed by Jim Gallucci, and it replaced a chain link fence gate with barbed wire at the top. In addition, the path that you see there was once a gray gravel vehicle entrance as well as a pedestrian entrance with parking between the herb garden and the Totten Center. Well, Tom Hunter developed a plan. I remember Rob Gardner, sadly no longer with us, who argued for hardscape and benches and water fountains, and lots of improvements were made in that decade that showed the garden was headed in the right direction and made such an impact on our visitors in the short term. As we grew in staff, we created departments. The Development Department, now under the leadership of Charlotte Jones Rowe, the Conservation Department, now under the leadership of Johnny Randall, and the Education Department, now under the leadership of Nancy Easterling. And because of the importance of conservation to our mission, I'm showing you one of Johnny Randall's pictures of Mason Farm Biological Reserve. There were other important steps. In the early 1990s, we completed a master plan with Jones & Jones of Seattle. That was made possible with a challenge gift from the Reeves Foundation. Ann Crammon, who was then director of the Atlanta Botanic Garden, visited to give us advice on improving the board and improving fundraising at the garden. And one of her recommendations was that we expand the size of the board. It was then 14 people. The board decided to take up a resolution to increase to 20, but then Jim Massey raised his hand. Jim Massey was then the secretary of the foundation. He was also curator of the UNC Herbarium. And he said, if we're going to move to 20, why don't we move all the way to 26? And that resolution passed. And when I think of all the people who got involved with the garden, who felt responsible for the future, just based on one of those 26 slots, that was a huge step. In the 1990s, we expanded fundraising. We set a record for federal grants with the Institute of Museum and Library Services, and we attracted state funding. Howard Lee, a Democrat, and Virginia Fox, a Republican, then on our board, wrote a bill to increase support to the garden by 50%. And they also supplied the money for the first round of design for a herbarium building. Improving all the time. This category is about how the staff always came up with ideas every year to improve something about the garden. I'm going to use the Coke Arboretum as my main example. The class of 1997 at Carolina voted to support our project to restore the black locust wisteria arbor that runs along the edge of the Arboretum. And when we did that, we created that gathering circle as you enter the Arboretum. Tom Keenan made possible the creation of this water feature, An Abundance of Springs, at the Coker Arboretum. That title is taken from a letter that was written in the 1780s to the state legislature, and it was proclaiming that Chapel Hill would be a good place for a university because of all of the water sources. The reliance on water those days is represented today by the old well, but those springs are long disappeared from the campus, routed underground by all the construction. Tom Keenan made possible the visibility of running water at the Arboretum again. And the DeBerry Overlook and Entrance, a new feature that coordinates with the Moorhead Building and presents a vista into the Arboretum, including the Walters pine, the largest and most magnificent specimen of that species anywhere on planet Earth. I was always impressed that the staff and board wanted to go first class with any project that we did. Back to the Arboretum for examples. The Coker Arboretum Centennial was a first-class event. 3 days of activities, lectures, a dinner, walks around the Arboretum, a trip to the UNC Herbarium that was also founded by Dr. Coker. Well, in the upper left, I'm standing with Mary Coker Jocelyn, the niece of Dr. William Coker, the man who started the Arboretum. And as part of that celebration, Mary finished her book, Essays on William Chambers Coker, Passionate Botanist, co-published by the Botanical Garden Foundation and the University Library System. A second book was also produced that year, A Haven in the Heart of Chapel Hill, Artists Celebrate the Coker Arboretum, written by our curator Dan Stern, edited by Sandra Brooks Mathers, and designed by Pamela Peace, who supplied the pop-up wisteria arbor in the center of the book. Going first class meant instead of a groundbreaking, we had a ground honoring and watered plants that we later planted around the new building. There we are doing the watering with Chancellor James Measer on the right and Lieutenant Governor Beverly Perdue helping out. She went on to become governor by the time the building opened. Going first class meant instead of just putting a dead branch of an evergreen tree at the top of the building as a good luck charm, we did the topping off ceremony by hoisting living potted plants, evergreen plants, to the top of the roof line, leaving them up there and then bringing them back down, and eventually our volunteers planted those trees next to the education center. Additions, being good stewards. The garden was given new responsibilities over the years, and every time we did a great job. We multiplied the value of that new responsibility. Battle Park's a good example. When we get something, we protect it and promote it. We begin fundraising, and we've raised an endowment for Battle Park. We get grants to support the work, as we did there. We involve UNC students. We hire good people. We organize volunteer groups. And we gain community involvement. In the center is the good person we hired. Stephen Keith became the first curator of Battle Park, and there he is cutting the cake on the day we reopened the restored trail system. And in the lower left, students and ground staff from the university are cutting a Chinese wisteria invasive plant garland to open the trails. In the lower right, you see representatives from the Battle family. And there is Steve in the right-hand picture at the top, holding a copy of the massive research report we completed on Battle Park with federal grant support. With Battle Park, we got the Forest Theater, that wonderful, charismatic stone amphitheater that expanded what the garden could offer. Stephen Keith worked very hard with groups that wanted to use Forest Theater for their events. It was actually Dr. Coker who consulted with folks from the outdoor drama program at UNC in the 19-teens to pick this spot in Battle Park for this amphitheater. Another new responsibility was the UNC Herbarium. At 700,000 specimens, that's the largest collection of museum specimens of plants in the Southeast. It documents the identity and distribution of plants in all 100 counties of North Carolina and southeastern states. When we got that responsibility, we became a major national institution overnight, and we did good things. We created 2 endowed student internships. We created a general endowment. We created a building fund. We worked with the Friends group for the herbarium. We organized a volunteer group. We involved students, and we hired good people. And one of those good people was Carol Ann McCormick. Another good person we hired was the director of the herbarium, Alan Weekly. He is a world's expert on the flora of the Southeast. He's published the Flora of Virginia. You can see in the left-hand picture, and in the right-hand picture I'm holding up a copy of a draft book that he will publish in the future, The Flora of the Whole Southeast. Thanks to the work of Alan and Carol Ann, we entered into partnerships with many other institutions, putting the vast information in the herbarium onto the World Wide Web. Another new project was the Carolina Campus Community Garden. That's the brainchild of Claire Lorch. It's a garden that teaches about horticulture of crop plants, about nutrition, about global food issues, about sustainability. It involves university students and classes. It offers volunteer opportunities to the community, and it distributes produce to the lowest paid workers at UNC in the housekeeping department. Healing and Hope Through Science was the inspiration of Katie Studemeyer. That's a project that delivers environmental and science education to children in long-term hospital stays. My last category is fun. One fun event was the day in the late 1990s when I went to my mailbox at the Totten Center and found a handwritten envelope. It was addressed to me in handwriting, and it had a regular U.S. postage stamp in the upper right. So I opened the envelope and imagined my surprise when out floated a handwritten check in the amount of $2 million. On the first line it said 2,000,000.00, and on the second line 2 million was spelled out, and then XX over $100. It was a gift from the estate of Kay Mouzon. Her husband, Olin Mouzon, was a professor at UNC and a member of the Botanical Garden Foundation Board. Kay was a volunteer in the UNC herbarium. When I saw that check, I knew immediately we could set out on the path that led to the Education Center. And today, the Education Wing of the Education Center is named in Kay's honor. The gift of the Mouzon estate also shows the importance of plan giving. Our largest commitments have come from plan giving, including our largest ever commitment from Jim and Delight Allen. The 1993 UNC Bicentennial Celebration included the Davy Poplar III project. Tree climbers went up the Davy Poplar and collected seeds. Seedlings were grown and potted. Then, sixth graders across the state wrote essays, and one sixth grader from each of the 100 counties of North Carolina was chosen as the winner and came to Chapel Hill. All the county flags were behind the stage, and each of the sixth graders received a potted Davy poplar to take back to their elementary school as a symbol of the importance of the university to the whole state. The Sculpture in the Garden project, led by Ken Moore and his wife Kathy Buck, is such a wonderful annual part of the garden to look forward to. And working with the Chapel Hill Garden Club on the Spring Garden Tour, which developed into a fundraiser for the Education Center. People are part of the fun memories too. John Terrace, the author of From Laurel Hill to Siler's Bog, The Walking Adventures of a Naturalist, all about the natural history of Mason Farm Biological Reserve. And Bill McDonough, a guru of sustainable design, who came to the Totten Center and spoke on his book, The Hanover Principles, Design for Sustainability, and Changed All Our Lives. And Tom Earnhardt, author of Crossroads of the Natural World, and the guy who brings us Exploring North Carolina on public TV. 6 of his shows have featured the North Carolina Botanical Garden. We worked with Bill Friday on many occasions. Tom Keenan got an honorary degree from the university in 2006, and sitting in the audience during the ceremony at graduation, the garden's name scrolled across the big screen at Keenan Football Stadium. Garrison Keeler came and broadcast Prairie Home Companion from the university, and his opening monologue was all about the magnificent trees at the Coker Arboretum. And Jack Palance won an Oscar in 1992, and backstage, a reporter asked him what he remembered about Chapel Hill, where he'd been a student in the 1930s. And he said he remembered the bicycles, the grits, and the Arboretum. And more fun people, the board. Arthur, Marcella, Harriet, Delight, Jim, Barbara, Tom, Jonathan, Missy, Lysandra, Betsy. I can't go on. I don't have time. But such wonderful people to involve in the future of the North Carolina Botanical Garden. And a dedicated staff. Rob, Janie, Johnny, Dan, Diane, Alicia, Nancy, Bibby, Elisa, Sandra, Sally, Bob, Sean, Cricket. I don't have time to go on with that list either. But what dedication is represented by the folks that have worked at the Botanical Garden. And the students, student interns, work-study students, and volunteers working in all phases of the garden: horticulture, education, conservation, and the herbarium. And the volunteers. There have been so many volunteers that have been essential to the garden, I can't even provide a sample of their names. But here's a picture of Barbara Wendell, our volunteer coordinator, who did so much for the volunteer program when we moved into the Education Center. But I just have to say help in thanking everyone that I wish I could thank by name and in person. 28 years of work by staff, volunteers, board, and students. And what a dedicated group of people working so hard on the mission of the North Carolina Botanical Garden. This has not been a thorough history of the garden. It's not been even a thorough history of the 28 years that I was director. See our newsletters and annual reports for many other examples of what took place during those years. The garden has become something remarkable. National awards and international recognition. It's an important institution now within the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. There's been lots of change in 28 years, but the soul of the garden was always in the right place. And I hope you agree with me that we can see Richie Bell's legacy in the beds of bloodroot and foam flower around the Education Center today. And I'm going to end with Richie Bell's words. In 2009, at the dinner that celebrated the opening of the Education Center, at the very end of the dinner, Richie grabbed the bell we called the bell. He got everybody's attention and he said, "I have just 8 words to say." And those words will be my words at the end of this presentation. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.